Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Direct Marketing News for today's webcast on closing the loop between online marketing and offline purchases, brought to you by Adometry and LiveRamp. My name is Allison Schiff, and I'm the digital strategist at Direct Marketing News. So marketers are migrating to digital channels like web, mobile, social, and email like never before. In fact, a recent eMarketer report found that U.S. e-commerce sales are set to total $259 billion this year, which is an almost 15% increase over last year. But there's kind of a disconnect when it comes to attribution, especially when we're talking about tracking purchases that take place offline. And when we say that, we're talking about 92% of all purchases. And that's why today we're going to be talking about connecting those very important dots. So before we get started, I just want to mention that if you're on Twitter, please use hashtag DMNWebcast, and feel free to submit your questions throughout the webcast, and we'll try to get to them as they come up or at the end of the presentation during the audience Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers, John Dietz, Vice President of Applications at Adometry, and Travis May, who's the Vice President of LiveRamp. So John will be starting us off. John, over to you.
Thanks, Allison. So, yeah, like Allison said, there's a lot of companies that are migrating to online, but I think what we're seeing is that the Internet is really generating more options. And what I mean by that is there's more ways to reach consumers. So, 20, 30 years ago, we started with an advertiser looking at ways to reach consumers that was television and print and radio and direct mail and out of home. And what we've had in the last 20 years really added is not replacement of channels, but adding new channels. So things like display ads and search and email and social and video and mobile. And so what that ends up doing is giving a little more challenge to advertisers who's trying to reach those users as they become more fragmented and moving across more channels. And so when we look at this as advertisers, let me move on to the next slide here. Really, it's looking at all these different channels, but there's more options not only in terms of channels, there's options in terms of how we purchase. So while you may be getting messages out to your consumers via TV and radio, they may be converting online, or in a lot of cases vice versa, which is you may be hitting consumers online via search, or you may be hitting emails, and they may come into your store, or you may call in and order online. So really what you have now is a scenario where you have this many-to-many relationship where any of these channels, online or offline, can lead to purchases that are, again, online or offline. So if you look at this next slide, it kind of illustrates this, which is, if we're talking about what that purchase process is, and this is somewhat of a simplification, on the left-hand side, we have a lot of these different channels. Again, it could be display ads, it could be search, it could be email, social, mobile, it could be direct mail, it could be radio. And in a lot of cases, it's more than one. And so on the left-hand side, you have all these different ways that you're reaching consumers. In the middle, you have this consumer who's trying to make a purchase decision based on a lot of different data that they're getting. They may be influenced by advertising or visiting websites or doing research. And then they have several options in terms of how they're going to act on that. And so we've got, again, e-commerce type sites, phone in, walk into a store. There's certainly other ways as well. And traditionally, the way we've looked at this in digital is we look at those red channels, which are really these online channels, and only correlated them to those online purchases. And you potentially really miss out a lot on that when you're really just looking at a subset of the ways that you can reach a consumer with a subset of the way that a consumer can end up making a purchase. Other ways that people in our industry have addressed this are through approaches like media mix modeling. But what media mix modeling does is it takes a really high-level, kind of rough view of this, looking at how channels may impact purchases overall. But what it fails to do, which we can do a lot on digital, is how do I tell which message is resonating, or what kinds of audiences are responding to what messages, or what keywords with search are really generating something, or how does Facebook react versus Twitter versus display ads versus search. And so this is where the real opportunity comes in terms of looking at the influences of all of these different channels across the different ways that we can end up purchasing, whether it's through any of these other channels. And so just to bring in a little data, Comscore did a study a couple years ago. They do a lot. And this one in particular was looking at people who did online research in a number of different categories to identify, once they did their online research, what was the channel that they used to actually make a purchase. So again, this is someone who they've already identified has done research online and then made a purchase decision. On average, what they found is even for people who were doing online research, across all categories, about twice as many people purchased offline than purchased online. And if you look at some of these specific categories, and I'll call it a couple of them, I don't know if you can read those, consumer electronics, you had about 5 times as many people purchasing offline as purchasing online for those products, again, after doing online research. For video games, it was about 10 times as many people. So what this means is that if you're looking at data and trying to measure the impact of your advertising, and you're measuring online advertising against only online purchases or online activity, you're potentially missing anywhere from twice as many conversions as you've tracked or purchases to up to 10 times that. So you may really be looking at a small portion. And it's not just a matter of necessarily scaling that, because it could be that different online messages that you have are pushing results or pushing users to one channel or another. So it may be a case that hitting certain audiences or certain messages is more likely to drive someone into an online or versus an offline kind of purchase path. So what I would like to do now is, let me see here. I'd like to pop up a poll and just kind of ask people what you're doing in terms of measuring the impact of online advertising right now. So I'll give a few seconds to answer that poll. We will be showing the results in just another slide or two so everyone can see. And what we'll do with that is kind of talk about what these different ways of measuring are really going to impact how you optimize your ad campaign, and also talk about different ways that we can look at that can improve kind of those downstream results. So I'll just wait, maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Hopefully we can get a lot of folks answering that. So lest anyone think that the audio's gone out, I'll keep talking. So we can go ahead and jump to the next slide, and I think the survey, I think most people did end up answering the survey. So let me talk a little bit about attribution. This is what my company, Adometry, does. So when we talk about attribution, realistically, everybody does attribution one way or another. Whether you're using a last event model, which is kind of a historic model for online advertising, where you're saying, I'm going to look at all the different events that happen within a customer journey, and I'm going to give all of the credit to the last one. So this would be a case of, let's say a user gets an email, does something on Facebook, goes to Google, searches for it, and then what we do is we give Google all of the credit for that. The problem obviously with that is that when you go to optimize your campaign, your data is going to say buy more Google, but it really doesn't give any credit to the early influencers. So as we've moved away from last event, we've moved to other attribution models like even attribution. Even would be giving equal credit to every touch point. Another approach that some folks use is the ad hoc approach. This would be a case where I'm going to go configure my system. I'm going to say first touch gets a certain percentage, last touch gets a certain percentage, and then I might split up everything in between. Or I might say I'm going to weight search a certain amount and display a certain amount. One of the challenges with that approach is that the results that you'll get are pretty much what you're looking for, because you'll go in and you'll say, well, I think first touch is worth 30%. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to weight first touch that same way. So it ends up being just about as arbitrary as even or even last event. So let's go ahead and take a look at the results of the survey, if we can do that now. So you can see there's a mix of a lot of different folks doing different approaches in terms of how to measure this. I mean, it's good to see that a lot of people are moving away from a last click method or a last event method, although it's understandable why they do, because if you look at a lot of the ad servers these days, that's the default thing that they'll show, and it's the easy way to do it. The problem is it's not very accurate. So moving a little bit more in the attribution space, kind of what we feel is the best approach is a data-driven, probabilistic approach. And what I mean by that is instead of saying I'm going to fix a set of weights for different events, I'm not going to give first or last a certain percentage. I'm going to look at maybe 2 or 3 months of data and look at the data and see which things are actually driving people to convert versus which things are not driving someone to convert. And I'm not going to go into details of how we at Adometry calculate that, but the point I'd like to make is that I think it's very important to use an attribution system that uses this kind of approach that is continuously looking at the data, because things change, in terms of identifying what's driving someone to make a purchase decision or not. Because even if you assign some arbitrary weights or try to use something like even, that can change over time. How you message your data could change things. Seasonality can change things. There's a lot of things that can change how someone's moving down that conversion path. Now, what you'll notice in this chart is that I've got this data-driven approach where each of those boxes represents some kind of media touch point, whether it be social or mobile or display or search or email or anything like that. And the result I'm looking at is an online conversion. And so this is where we talk about the missing link. We've got, again, all of these events, and I'm measuring it against, potentially 1/10 or 1/5 of all of the conversions that I'm really influencing. And so if we look at the next slide here, this is where we want to be able to say, well, what about all of those users I've influenced that call in an order or walk into a store and make a purchase? And for us to really gauge the value of my online advertising campaign and really understand what my return on ad spend is, I need to be able to pull all of that data in. And so, I don't want to just be looking at, 20 or 30% of all of my purchases. I want to be looking at all of it to be able to measure the real impact of that and figure out how each of those is contributing to those purchases. And so this is where we've really brought in our good friends at LiveRamp in order to bring in that offline data and allow us to track attribution, do the normal things we do there in terms of driving those purchases, whether it's online or offline or however they're making those purchases, in an accurate and a secure way. So with that, what we'll do is just talk quickly about what LiveRamp does and what Adometry does, and then we can get into the details of really how we solve this problem. So I will kick it over to Travis at LiveRamp now.
Thanks, John, for the great overview of the challenge and opportunity around cross-channel attribution. What we're going to do now is take a step back and talk about what LiveRamp and Adometry each do, and then talk about how the combined solution can help tackle the offline attribution challenge. So LiveRamp is the leader in a process called data onboarding. What that means is that we help activate offline data sets online. So starting on the left of this slide, companies can send us their offline data sets, such as their CRM data or their offline conversions. This data is typically tied to an email address or a name and address, which means it's typically siloed from online advertising. So marketers can send us this CRM data, and we can anonymously match that information to cookies, unlocking the information online. And then we can send the data to all the major online platforms that the marketer works with, such as the marketer's DMP, the marketer's DSP, and of course their attribution platform, such as Adometry.
Thanks, Travis. So just for a quick overview of what Adometry does, we are an attribution provider. So what that means is that we're bringing a lot of this different data in, whether it's digital channels, offline channels. We bring in first-party audience data so that we can see how folks, how different kinds of users are impacted. We can bring in first-party data, and what we do at Adometry is run all of that data. So the first key is how do we get all this data, Then we move into ad verification. So what's the good stuff? Can we first cut out the bad things, the things that aren't working? The next step is that attribution. So this is that multi-touch attribution where we say, I'm going to look at all of these events, I'm going to find all of these sequences, and identify the credit I'm going to give to every sequence in terms of driving someone to make a purchase, so that I can turn around and make recommendations on how to change that media spend, or what messages are working on what platforms, or which channels are more effective at driving certain kinds of behavior. And then we move to what's in that bottom box, which is optimization, where we put all that data into a predictive model and say, if you want to maximize your results, whether it's purchases or some kind of proxy for purchases, or better yet, both online purchases and offline purchases, here's the mix between channels, and even within channels, keywords and display sites and all those kind of things that I should shift my budget to get maximum results. And then what we do is we take the results of that and we push them into our graphical user interface. We generate custom reports. We have automated feeds into demand-side platforms and networks so that they can bid against the fractional attributions that we're pushing out. We can push out keywords, or we can push data right into a CRM. So for us, it's really about taking in as much data as we can, processing that with our proprietary algorithms that really generate show you what's driving results, and then putting that data out in a way that our clients can use it. So that's just a quick overview of what Adometry does. So now we'll dig a little bit more into the specific process that we use with LiveRamp to bring that offline purchase data into our system so that we can generate those results. So I will kick it back to Travis right now.
Thanks, Ron. So I'll dive into the details of how the offline transaction data can actually get activated online. So it's a pretty simple two-step process. So the first step is that the advertiser can provide the CRM file that has the transaction data to LiveRamp. Then the next step is LiveRamp can match that CRM data anonymously to cookies and sync that data to Adometry. Once we've synced the data to Adometry and it's tied to cookies, Adometry can then tie it to impressions that were also served to those cookies and combine that with the purchase data to perform its attribution processes. So walking through the process in a little bit more detail, the first step is a secure file transfer between the marketer and LiveRamp. So the marketer is going to send its data tied to an email address or a name and address to LiveRamp. It can then include whatever offline purchase criteria it wants. So it could have very high level attributes, such as whether or not the person purchased in the last 6 months, or it could have very specific product level purchase information, such as whether the person purchased paint. It could also have much more detail than that. It could have exact transaction values and other information that can be used within the attribution process. LiveRamp's job is basically to activate that data within Adometry. So what LiveRamp does is we anonymously tie CRM data to cookies. We do that by matching with registration data from a network of about 300 sites that LiveRamp has partnered with. So through that registration data, LiveRamp is able to take the data that was originally keyed to email address or name and address, and then match it anonymously into cookies. So what you can see here is the data that was previously tied to a name and address, and as well as an email address, is now just tied to an anonymous Adometry cookie ID. But it's exactly the same data, and it's matched on an individual level. So then we send that data over to Adometry.
Right, and so this is where the magic happens, and I hesitate a little bit to call it magic because I have an engineering background. But what we talk about is smarter analytics, and this is where we get excited. So for the last several years, we've been looking at how all of these channels and how all of the elements within the channels contribute to online purchases, and I think that's been great for us, and we've generated a lot of good results for our customers. But what's really exciting is now we can start to look at all of these events that are happening offline. So now I'm looking at sequences of, here's somebody who maybe gets my email, they're on my email list, maybe they get a direct mail, maybe they're doing something on Twitter, they're seeing a couple display ads, doing a Google search, and whereas before I wouldn't have seen any reaction and I would have looked at this as possibly a non-converting path, now I can maybe look at this as, wow, I had a user who went through these results and now went in-store and made a purchase, and I can attribute that back. And so this is kind of the kind of things that we get excited about at Adometry. So now when I'm looking at these offline conversions, I can look at which channels are influencing these offline purchases. What kind of audiences are responding offline for those purchases? So is it men or women or certain age groups or income levels? So we can overlay that audience data and say, here's what's really driving those results. When we look at things like what creatives are driving people to stores, is it something like a buy now or something that we may have traditionally thought of as early stage funnel type results? And then ultimately what we're trying to get to is, how should the advertiser adjust their spend to increase their overall revenue? So like Travis said, when we're working with LiveRamp with a lot of these clients, we can bring in not only total purchase data, but revenue, and start looking at return on ad spend from a revenue standpoint, both for online or e-commerce type purchases, as well as for those offline in-store or over-the-phone purchases. So just real quick, I want to show a couple of screenshots of what our product looks like. This is not something I really want to focus a lot on, but when we look at the kind of results that we show, we're going to be looking at things like which channels are contributing to different purchases over line. And again, this is using a fractional, multi-touch attribution methodology where I can say, well, based on all the sequences I saw and all of the purchases and non-purchases I saw, I can give credit to each individual touch point within a customer journey towards that purchase or that revenue. And so we can start to show things like over time which channels are driving people to make purchases. We can look at things like which sites are early stage, introducers, which ones are really good at closing, and this really gives me some data I can use to start to tailor my message or optimize my campaign, or maybe even change creatives and where I'm going to place which creatives or what kind of audiences I want to hit. And most importantly, we can start to look at trend data, so I can see, over time, how am I doing at increasing my ability to hit those kind of users in all of my various channels that I'm tracking, whether it be search or display or anything like that. So again, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the UI so you can kind of get a sense of how we show that data. The great thing about how we bring this offline purchase data in is that we can look at them almost as if they were online purchases. So anything that we've been able to do historically in terms of looking at online purchases or online events, we can just apply that same kind of logic to these offline purchases, because through LiveRamp, we're basically turning those into online purchases, even though they're not. They look like it from a data standpoint. So let me pass this back to Travis so he can talk about really what to look for in a offline to online onboarder like LiveRamp.
Great, thanks, John. So I'll walk through the key criteria that a marketer should be looking at when determining what partner to work with to bring their data online. And so there are a few key criteria that a marketer should be looking at. The first is accuracy. So especially for the attribution process, it's very important that the data that's being onboarded is exactly the offline data that's being sent. As I mentioned, LiveRamp uses registration data to create one-to-one matches. There are different ways that matches occur, and making sure that matches occur on a one-to-one basis is important especially for the attribution process. At the same time, scale is very important. So you want to get a large enough sample of the offline data set brought into your attribution platform. So for example, if you see 1 million offline conversions and you want to bring those online, you're not going to be able to bring all of them online, but typically you should be able to bring about 40% online. The next key criterion is speed. So if you're trying to learn from your attribution results and change your ad campaigns based on it, you want to make sure that the whole process, start to finish, happens relatively quickly. The typical speed for an onboarder should be within 1 to 2 days of sending your file to the onboarder. The onboarder should be able to then send it onto the attribution platform, mapped to cookies. The next key criteria, I would say, is flexibility. So as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the different attributes a marketer might want to send, that can change a lot from marketer to marketer. So you might want to send sort of specific granular purchase level information, and you might have a very unique format that you're looking to onboard. So you want to work with an onboarder that can handle that very granular format of data and bring it online. The next criterion that's important is integrations. So you want to make sure that when you activate the data online, that your onboarder is tightly integrated with the platforms that you want to work with. So for example, if you're activating, in this case, it's very important that if you're onboarding into Adometry, that there's a tight integration between your onboarder and Adometry. And then the last key criterion, which I'll talk about in more detail in the next slide, is privacy and security. The data that you're sending over is your CRM data and is your offline transactions. It's obviously a key asset for your company, and you want to make sure that you're protecting that data well. So the key aspects in privacy and security within the onboarding process is to ensure that the onboarder protects consumers and their data and provides notice and choice. So the first key criterion in this is that the entire process should be anonymous. So there should never be PII stored in cookies. The next key criterion is data should be securely siloed. So if we're onboarding data for one marketer, we're only onboarding it for that marketer's use and not for any other purposes. And then the last key criterion is that there should be a consumer opt-out. I'll now walk through a few key client characteristics for who ideally should be using a joint solution like the LiveRamp Adometry solution. So the first key criterion is that the marketer should have a large budget for online marketing. The next key criterion is that a large fraction of their sales are in store or by phone. When those two are true, any online only attribution process is going to be missing a large fraction of the sales. So that's where it's important to begin pulling in the offline data. And then finally, the sales process needs to involve a collection of some type of personally identifiable information, such as an email address or a name and address. Again, this is the match key that's ultimately used to bring the data online. So walking through the key verticals that there are a lot of different verticals that can use this solution, but walking through a few key verticals, I'm going to talk specifically about retail, travel, auto, and financial services. So a typical retailer will have a loyalty card program, and for many of its users will have loyalty card data tied to name and address. So this means that whenever someone buys in the store, the data is known by the loyalty card program, tied to name and address, and can then be brought online for the attribution process. The next key industry is travel. And for a typical travel company, you'll see many off-site bookings. You'll see bookings by phone, bookings by tools like Orbitz, et cetera, that aren't typically treated as online conversions. Again, all of that data is usually tied to name and address and tied to email address, and so that data can again be onboarded as an offline conversion into a platform like Adometry for measurement purposes. The next key vertical that I'll talk about is auto. So all auto purchases happen offline, but there are obviously large online campaigns. What the LiveRamp Adometry joint process can do is again tie the offline auto conversion to the online impressions. And then the final vertical I'll talk about is financial services. If for financial services company, you often see conversions that occur in branch or occur by phone. And in all these cases, there's a name and address tied to the account information. Again, LiveRamp can onboard that information, and then Adometry can use it to determine how online ad impressions are leading to those in branch or by phone conversions. And with that, I'll turn it over to John to talk about how the LiveRamp Adometry match process worked for an actual campaign.
Right. So just so everyone knows, this isn't a theoretical discussion. This is something that we're doing right now with clients, and so it's fairly new, but we have some pretty exciting results. So I'll give you a couple high-level results from one client who I can't name, unfortunately. But this is a retail brand with a fairly large footprint in terms of physical stores across the nation. They have a loyalty card program, which includes some of that PII data like name, address, and email that they tie to purchase and revenue. And so like Travis was saying, one of the requirements for this specific kind of integration is having some of that data that we can use to really tie those users to those online presences. And in this case, the advertiser was doing display campaigns, they're doing search, they were doing email. We were also tracking web traffic. So I'm getting some notes that maybe the audio is cutting out. I'm hoping someone can hear me right now. Okay, good. So it sounds like at least some folks can hear me. Sorry if the audio cut out at some point. So again, what I wanted to say was the important thing about this is we are doing this for real customers right now. In this particular case, this client that has physical stores, actually the vast majority of their purchases happen within those physical stores. And yet, what they needed to do was measure the impact of their online campaigns, which are a significant portion of that ad campaign, and against those offline purchases. So to go through a couple of quick results, in this case, for just 1 month, we were able to track 7 million in-store purchases. So what that means is for that 1 month, we were able to get purchase data, which includes time and date and how much revenue they spent. And again, by the time it comes to us at Adometry, it's all anonymized. So we never see any of that PII data, and it's not important for us in order to run this kind of analysis. So this would be 7 million in-store purchases that LiveRamp was able to track to an online cookie so that we could track it against all of these online events. Of those 7 million in-store purchases, obviously a lot of those are going to be folks who were not exposed to online advertising. They're using other channels, or maybe they just walked into the store. Over 500,000 of those, again, just for that 1 month, we were able to attribute to online marketing events. Roughly, and these are rounded off, roughly 75% of those to display ads, about 15% were to emails to existing customers, and about 5% were to search. And again, this is using a fractional attribution model to provide credit against each of these channels. Of those 500,000 conversions or in-store purchases that were driven by digital advertising, 68% were multi-touch. So that means 68%, or about two-thirds of all of those conversions came from people who had, maybe a display ad and a search, or an email and then a search. So some combination of things, which could have included some web traffic as well. And what we also found was that multiple touches increases that conversion rate by about 60%. So this is where we can start looking at very specific results for a client. Now, I don't get into a lot of the details about this client because that's confidential, but that client was able to go through and start to look at which creatives are driving these offline purchases, or which keywords within search, or what kind of messages that I have within my email are the ones that are really driving someone to make that purchase. And so, this is real data. This is data from a client. Again, it's only for 1 month at that point. We've been doing them for several months, and we're still getting great results. And this is, like I said, this is a real product. This is not just a theoretical result. So I think we ran through this presentation a little bit quickly. I think the nice part is that gives us a little extra time to answer questions. So hopefully folks have questions. Travis and I are very willing to answer whatever you guys would like to ask and give any clarifications on things that weren't clear. So I think I can pass it back to Allison.
All right, great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Travis. We have a good 20 minutes left for questions, which is great because we have a lot of questions that have come in. So I'm just going to jump right into it. How does TV and outdoor and also just the traditional channel factor into the multi-touch attribution model?
That's a good question. So, I think you approach attribution kind of in a multi-step process. So while a lot of our clients will start off looking at just online channels to online purchases, which is still a big improvement over what a lot of folks are doing right now, the more we can bring in of this other data and apply it to our models, the better it's going to be. So we already have capabilities when we look at things like our predictive modeling to bring in some of these offline channels. Now, with attribution, clearly you can't go out and say that this user saw a TV ad and then they saw a display and then did a search and then converted. That kind of data just doesn't exist. Or I can't say that they read an ad in a magazine and did that. We can actually do that with direct mail. That's actually with LiveRamp as well. So if a client has a list of postal addresses that they're sending their direct mails to, we can actually bring that in as a very specific touch point in terms of driving someone to a conversion. So in terms of how we deal with aggregate data, so when we look at like television, print, out of home, if we can pull in aggregate data, we really can do kind of a hybrid media mix modeling approach combined with attribution so that we scale our attribution appropriately and generate the correct results. So for clients, we've done multiple approaches. In some cases, we've partnered with an MMO provider, if a client already has one, to merge that data. Or in some cases, we're working with a client and really providing both those MMO services and that attribution service. And it's not really just MMO services. It's about combining those together to generate really unique results. So there's a couple of ways that we address those offline channels with our clients.
So a lot of retailers don't know the name or email addresses of their in-store customers. So what are some tactics for bringing these purchases into the overall data set?
Right. So again, in a lot of cases, and I'll let Travis answer this one as well if he has something to add, we're looking to pull in as much data as we can. So our worst case scenario is maybe we get aggregate data and we use that hybrid media mix modeling approach to make sure that we're accounting for offline channels or offline purchases within our attribution model. It's not the ideal scenario. The ideal, of course, is kind of like when we went through what's a good candidate for this integration, which would really be that we have at least name and postal address for a client so we can match it to an online user. So the bulk of our clients that are using this type of integration have something like a loyalty card, or they have at least some, even if you just have an email address, a lot of times LiveRamp can do a really good job in matching that to an online cookie. So the more data that we can get about that user, the more likely we can tie them to that anonymous online presence that we can then run attribution against. If we don't have that in any way, right, if there's no approach to getting that, then we'll back up and we'll try to take this aggregate approach. Travis, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that basically covered it. So really, to use the individual level approach, you either, if you're, again, in some verticals like auto or financial services, you're always going to have a name and address in the transaction process. Within retail, it's really about having a loyalty card program or otherwise collecting the email address, for instance, when sending out receipts or something like that in the transaction process. So if there's not a loyalty card program or another way that it's being collected, then you would likely be looking to do something more in aggregate, like John was mentioning.
So when you're tying back CRM data to cookies, does the 30-day cookie window have any impact on that? Is this time-sensitive data or not?
No. So there's basically a continuous matching process that happens on LiveRamp and Adometry side. So even if cookies were shown, or even if impressions were shown months ago, LiveRamp would still be able to match the transaction data to those cookies. So you probably want the data to be relatively time sensitive, mostly because you want to be able to use that data to inform results and inform sort of new actions and sort of optimize your campaigns. But it's not a requirement, and there are customers that if you're looking to analyze a long campaign that took place and there's a slow sales cycle, so again, maybe think about auto or an industry like that, you can still, at the end of the campaign, look at how impressions seen months ago impact the transactions that are occurring today.
Well, how does Do Not Track come into play with all of this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the privacy side is extremely important in this process. Again, there's because the consumer transaction data is involved. It's important that everyone sort of abides by industry best practices. The sort of key industry principles today are really around notice and choice. So that's basically notifying consumers that this process is occurring, and then giving consumers the ability to opt out. And so if consumers opt out, then basically their data won't be used within this matching process.
So when consumers clear their cookies, are they breaking the attribution process or not? Can you keep it going?
This is John. I'll take a first cut at this, Travis, and then you can add something if you want. I can tell from an attribution standpoint, we do a lot of testing to test for cookie rejection and cookie deletion. We're very careful not to cross the line into a technology that's going to violate the privacy of a user or counteract a desire for that user to not be tracked at all. So what we typically do is when we're looking at that data, because we can measure the effects of that deletion and that rejection, we can account for that in terms of how we process the data. So fortunately, it's a fairly small percentage of people that regularly delete cookies. We have done a lot of studies internally on the lifetime of our cookie. We tend, when we track the existence of our cookies, about 85% of the users that we see already have our cookie enabled. So in terms of looking at attribution, it ends up really being enough data if we discount the rejection and the deletion to get us pretty good results.
Travis, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think that's consistent with what we've seen.
Okay. Well, how much variance have you observed when it comes to cookie-enabled and C-disabled systems? Is cross-browser usage an issue, or isn't it?
We haven't seen it as from the LiveRamp angle, we haven't seen it as a large issue today. Again, as John mentioned, most browsers today are cookie enabled, so it's not a large challenge to handle conversions that are happening in browsers where cookies are disabled. But certainly there are there are other opportunities down the line for looking at different cross-browser applications and looking at when users use multiple devices and being able to tie that data together beyond cookies.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that real briefly because we could probably do a whole hour on cross-device attribution. It's an area that we are actively working in with a number of partners, including LiveRamp, in terms of how we map devices together so we can get that complete look. So I don't want to get really too deep into it right now, but there's definitely tactics for how to tie these things together and how to generate good attribution results, which is a combination of getting those mappings as well as recognizing kind of that sample size where you can get that data and running the statistical models accurately.
Well, what is the typical match rate percentage of the CRM data files, like data to files?
It's usually about 40% or so. So if a company, let's say, has 10 million transactions that occur offline, from LiveRamp's angle, we can usually match about 4 million of those 10 million to Adometry cookies.
That's fairly high. That's a lot of percentage.
Yeah, well, and it's important. I'm sorry, it's important for Adometry for us to get those kind of match rates as well because of the nature of what we're doing. Because we're not using aggregates, we're looking at very specific and very granular type data to identify combinations of creative or geography or audience or what site or what keyword. Having that amount of data is really important for us to generate really good results for our clients.
Well, how long is the integration time for matching CRM data to cookies? Is it happening in real time, or how does that work exactly?
So it's not real time, but it's relatively fast. So from LiveRamp's side, it's usually I'd say about 72 hours from the time that we get a file to the time that the data is live within Adometry's platform. So it can pretty quickly be used to start informing results.
What about mobile browsing and shopping? Can you map this activity and consider it in your general attribution modeling?
So that kind of gets to the point I was making around the device mapping. So mobile presents its own kind of challenges where some mobile devices allow third-party cookies, some don't. You have in-app ads that provide a different kind of device identification. So this is kind of that bigger, like I said, could be another hour discussion about how do we approach mobile and how do we tie that together. So it's certainly possible to do. I don't want to say that it's easy. We work with a lot of partners, like I said, including LiveRamp, in order to tie those together. But what's important for us, and if you look at what Adometry does, it's really about, can we get all the data we can we tie it together, can we process that, and then can we generate the right results? So our focus is always going to be doing that. And mobile's a little bit of a moving target because it's changing so fast. Just as an example, on Apple devices, so iPhones and iPads, it used to be that you would use a UDID for app tracking. Apple, of course, has now deprecated that, so there's new methods for doing so. So this is something that is top of mind for us in terms of making sure that we're using the most modern approaches to mapping these devices together.
So does a business have to have a large customer database to benefit from a joint online-offline solution, or not?
There has to be, I'd say, a critical mass of of transactions that are tied to, again, to name and address or email address for this to be worthwhile. That can vary a lot from industry to industry. So for example, with an auto, because transactions are so large, a database that's much smaller than a retailer's database might have enough value for this to be worthwhile. So I would probably think more about is there a significant portion of the value that's happening offline and tied to a name and address or email address, and then if so, a solution like this could work.
The thing that I'd like to add to that is from an attribution standpoint, what we look for is number of transactions over some time period. So let's say for example, we want to generate monthly results. What we would look for is really going to depend on how many channels the client is running and how many different sites or how many different keywords in order to generate that data. Because we're using really a data-driven approach to attribution and not a more arbitrary approach like a rules-based or an even attribution, we really need a lot of that data in order to find out what's driving someone to make a purchase. As a rule of thumb, we typically say somewhere around 2,000 transactions per month will get us a pretty good amount of granularity to generate results. So, when I used that one retail example, in that case, we're looking at just offline over 500,000 a month. That's much more than we would need to generate good results. For them, we're generating great results. But as a rule of thumb, it's not about the size of your database or the number of customers. It's really, for us, about the number of those transactions.
And John, here's a question for you specifically. Can you attribute impressions before and after the purchase date? I guess so identifying what's happened before and what's happened after the actual buying of something.
Yeah, so when we run our attribution models, what we do is we build these customer sequences. And when we're attributing credit, it's always going to be based on events that happen prior to a purchase. So if another event happens post-purchase, and this is one of the reasons why we need to get a purchase date in there, so we're not doing a situation where somebody walks in the store and makes a purchase and then sees an ad and then we attribute credit. That would be obviously wrong. If they see more media after their purchase and then make another purchase down the road, we can include that. But for the way that we do attribution right now, it's only going to look at events that happen prior to that purchase, and typically for a customer, we will do what we call a lag analysis in order to identify how much of a look back is even reasonable for this particular vertical and for this particular customer, so that we're not giving credit to something that maybe happened 2 months ago, where we can demonstrate from a data standpoint that that's not going to have any impact on a purchase down the line.
And on the LiveRamp side, we see some other goals marketers might have after purchases happen. So, for example, they might want to suppress running future impressions at people who've converted. So that's another application that marketers can do is once the person has purchased a particular product, they basically instruct their media platform to stop serving ads at that user.
So we have time just for one last question, and this is for both of you. What would you say is the most common mistake you see marketers making with their attribution strategy, and a tip to avoid that?
I'll jump in on that. So, I think the thing that we see most is really there's a spectrum in terms of optimizing marketing. And when I say a spectrum, there's kind of this worst case and a best case. And this best case may be this imagined scenario where you're pulling in every single channel and every campaign and every marketing touch point and online and offline and attributing to every end result. And I shouldn't say imaginary because this happens. I think the problem that you can get to is thinking that if you can't get to the ultimate kind of result, then it's not worth doing anything, and clients end up sitting with doing a last click, or in some cases they even have siloed data where search is measured by itself and display is measured by itself. So the trick is not to go, from all the way from point A to point B in one step. Is to say, well, how can I get better? Because even, let's say I go from going last click to going to a fractional model, but I maybe don't have everything. I could still see, a 20, 30% lift in my advertising without going all the way. And the right approach is really not to necessarily try to, go all the way to that endpoint at a single point, because that becomes complicated, but to try to move in that direction, and you'll get incremental improvements as you go down that path. And bringing in offline conversions is really one big important step along that path that can get you to a lot better results. So it can be intimidating when you look at the amount of stuff that we can do, but it's not always required to do everything in order to see real results.
Yeah, and I would say from our angle, it looks like a lot of the industry is just fairly early stage and sort of fairly immature for what marketers are actually taking advantage of today. So I think a large percentage of marketers are still looking at last click attribution and are still basically pulling in sort of no offline data or no data from other channels. And so I think, as John was saying, basically just sort of beginning to start looking at sort of all the other factors will provide so much more advantage over what's happening today.
Great. Well, thank you, Travis. Thank you, John. That was a great webcast.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.